Welcome to Rubin On Point, a podcast about cancer, resilience, and being human. I'm Dr. Dan Rubin, and together we'll uncover the true power of resilience, the strength to recover, adapt, and thrive through life's toughest challenges. Each episode will bring bold ideas, transformative practices, and inspiring stories that redefine what health, healing, and what the human spirit can achieve. And you're going to meet some really cool people along the way. If you're ready to turn obstacles into opportunities and live with greater purpose and courage, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Your journey to resilience begins now. Welcome to Rubin On Point. This is a podcast about cancer. It's a podcast about resilience and most of all about being human and exploring what it is that makes us human in reference to resilience and cancer. We're here today to talk about EMF and EMF mitigation and what it is and what it means and why it's something you should really be aware of and why it's important to your humanity. I'm here with Josh Bruni and Dr. Dogris, and we're going to jump into this subject matter. Josh, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're from Aries Tech, and what's your background?
Yeah, my background, I wish I was as smart as the two of you guys. I don't have the doctor in front of my name, but I'm the CEO of American Aries, more commonly known as Aries Tech, and we make a technology that modulates man-made electronic frequencies to be more biologically friendly and compatible with humans and really all living organisms.
Excellent. Dr. Dogris from Neurofield, what's your background?
I'm a neuroscientist and a psychologist that works out of California. I've been in the field of neurotherapy for about 35 years now. My company designs EEG hardware devices to measure the brain and analyze brainwave function. We also design electromagnetic stimulation devices and electrocranial stimulation devices. So I have a lot of background with EMF and the good and the bad of both sides of it.
Well, thank you. I love being the third smartest one on 3 podcasts. So, Dr. Dogris, if you don't mind if I start with you, we've heard the word EMF or the term EMF. We've heard electromagnetic frequencies or fields. These are things that I think most of us know are out there. Can't really see them. Some of us can feel them. I think those who are more sensitive can feel them, but they do something to all of us. What exactly are EMFs? There's normal EMFs that our bodies can understand, and then there's sort of the disorganized ones or the ones that we created as humans. Can you tell us a little bit?
That's a great question, and there's a lot of mystery around it. You know, electromagnetic frequencies are generated by the planet, right? And the Earth has a Schumann frequency. It's about 7.5 cycles per second, roughly. It changes depending on where you are. This is a natural EMF that's generated by the planet, and it's good for you. It grounds you, and there's actually books written on the topic talking about how it has all sorts of nice health benefits. If you look at the history of energy medicine, essentially, going way back even to Roman times, people were exposed to different kinds of low-frequency EMFs as part of a medical treatment, as a way to help a person to get better from different kinds of problems. The problem that happened was technology. As we started to generate bigger and better technologies, we didn't really realize the impact of the faster frequency EMF. Slow frequency, not so bad. Okay. Low intensity, not so bad. But when you get next to a 4G, a 5G repeater, or you're holding a phone in your hand that is generating a very significant EMF square wave that's electronic.
We need to talk about square waves, absolutely.
Yeah. We're talking about something that the body doesn't produce, that it doesn't know what to do with, and it's disruptive to the human body. It's disruptive to the molecular systems in our body.
So I'm going to, for the people out there, we're going to get into some terms, but it's really important to talk about some of this terminology because this is what you're bombarded with. And there's a lot of people out there buying red light devices. There's some, buying what they think might be EMF diffractors that are not Aries Tech products. So I really want to talk about terms. But in terms of when you said the body doesn't necessarily understand this, this is a discussion that I have, and I'm going to bring it into the diet world. Talking about red meat. In my naturopathic oncology practice, we talk a lot about diet, and people ask about meat. And there's a difference between what we know as corn-fed meat, or a cow that eats corn, and versus a cow that grazes and eats grass. And cows, for instance, everybody should be able to understand this, naturally graze, and their natural diet is grass. It's a leafy green. But when you don't allow a cow to walk around and you feed them corn, that's putting food in their body that their body really doesn't genetically understand. So you then produce a different type of product in that body. Lots of fat, lots of inflammatory molecules in the meat that you eat. The difference between corn-fed and grass-fed beef is using food that an entity or a biological entity understands. It's now the same with incoming waves. And so you, Dr. Dogris, you said 7 cycles per second. I believe that 1 cycle per second would be considered 1 hertz.
That's correct.
So it's important to understand hertz, because you said the Earth, I'm thinking that if the Earth is 7 cycles per second, and that's its harmonious frequency upon which we utilize that energy, that's 7 hertz, correct?
That's correct. Actually, the Schumann resonance is 7.63.
Got it. What's the Schumann resonance?
Yeah, it was Schumann was the person that discovered it, and it was basically the electromagnetic hum of the planet, the breath of the planet, if you will.
I love that, and because that's very akin to the pH of our blood, which is in this 7.5, 7.6. Thank you for that. You said something about a square wave, which we'll have to get into, and then you said 5G, you said 4G, and you said fast frequencies. So are 4G and 5G faster frequencies or a higher hertz level than the harmony of the Earth?
Oh my God, yes. We're talking about gigahertz here. So, we're talking about gigahertz. So millions and of cycles per second that are occurring, and they're not natural. So if a square wave is something that a digital product produces. The body produces sinusoidal waveforms. They're very smooth, they're nice. It's very like looking at like a rhythm of the body, essentially.
Like looking at a heartbeat strip, for instance?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
when you're looking at an EKG, you're looking at a sinusoidal rhythm,
Okay.
right? A QRS complex, essentially, right?
Yes.
And so you have a great idea of the rhythm of the body. But if you imagine if that QRS looked like a square wave, just going up and down like that, you would have a big problem with that heart.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So when you have something that's bombarding the body millions of times per second, and it's a higher frequency, it has an impact on the molecular structures of the body. Most notably, the mitochondria, and in terms of the mitochondria's ability to produce ATP can get impacted significantly. And there are specific frequency ranges that can shut down mitochondria. There's actually a company that worked on glioblastoma, and you get diagnosed with that. Most people would say get your things in order pretty quickly because it's inoperable. It's one of the things that's going to kill you pretty quick. This company just discovered that a very low frequency radio wave at 250,000 cycles per second would render the mitochondria inert.
Are you talking about Optune?
Novatech.
Novatech. Okay, so same. I believe that's the same company. So this is a device that they wear on their heads about 18 hours per day and is powered by a large battery, and it's like a tumor treating field.
That's correct.
So what's the frequency of that one?
250,000 cycles per second for glioblastoma.
Which means that it's way faster than processing than what we normally are accustomed to in our body.
Correct.
And that can disrupt the mitochondria in the glioblastoma cells.
It actually renders them inert. And so they can't produce any form of energy for the cell to replicate itself.
That's incredible, because so much work that's being done on cancer, especially in the non-conventional world, is focused on mitochondrial function. I mean, look at all the the metabolic therapies that are being talked about, and now we're talking about EMFs that actually endanger the well-being and the vitality of mitochondria in all of our body, because we're walking around exposed to 5G probably most places in a metropolitan area, I would assume.
Exactly. That's exactly it. When we discovered that, hey, this is the case. This can be focused for good, but the majority of these things are also happening in a way that is really undocumented. It's unknown. It's a scattershot approach, and yeah, it's probably going to produce all sorts of different types of pathology.
Got it. So, Josh, Mr. Bruni, why is this okay to have these frequencies out there that we're exposed to constantly?
Well, I don't know that it's okay.
Indeed. I didn't think it was.
I think what happens is I always, look, my background has always been in tech and the internet, and I've grown up with building, kind of my life on through digital media and whatnot, and so I always, like everyone else, is a fan of innovation, technology, and a faster internet to me is always a good thing in my world, right?
Right.
And
I like that.
we all like that. And the moment that you're traveling and that internet's not as snappy as you'd like it to be, it gets really, really frustrating. And I always just kind of explain there's a kind of a couple factors. I think number one, in the U.S. in particular, we definitely have a bias towards innovation, and that innovation forces us to progress. And sometimes there are negative factors. There's a shadow side of that in some instances that we don't really figure out until way later. And there's so many examples of that, whether that's building materials that turn out to be toxic, or products that are. We're dealing with plastic right now is a big one, right? Or fluoride, or all these different things that at one time were viewed as safe or healthy or whatever. And so my point is I think in the U.S. we have this bias towards innovation, and then saying, hey, what's the trade-off? And is the trade-off is the innovation greater than this potential trade-off? And I think we're always doing that calculus in the U.S. And I think EMF is in that category of let's keep progressing forward, and we'll figure the rest out as we go. I think what hasn't caught up in this field has been the regulation, and which again, look, we're in a world right now where regulation is debated. How much regulation is necessary? Again, specifically in the U.S. And but you're seeing more and more people raising their hands saying, there might be a problem, and the regulation is so far behind. We're not even close. I would also say, and Dr. Dogris probably speak more to this, is the particular measurement that you find attached to most of our devices, the SAR rating, for example, is arguably not even the right metric to use to determine the safety of the technologies that we're talking about. It was designed for, from my understanding, a completely different purpose, and not necessarily for this range of frequencies that we're actually talking about.
SAR ratings were designed for a different purpose.
Yeah,
what is a SAR rating?
And like I said, I don't want to get over my skis here, but Dr. Dogris, I don't know if you're better to answer that, but it's the standard absorption rate, and I would kick back over to you to maybe explain what that means.
Important.
Yeah, think about Chernobyl.
Okay.
Right? When Chernobyl was first happened and they were evaluating the severity of the damage, they sent people in with a specific meter that was able to read a certain amount of radioactivity. And then they went back and they reported that to the authorities and said, well, it's this much. And then somebody said, well, wait a minute, that meter tops out at this much. It doesn't go higher than this, because they were saying, well, it's equivalent to maybe one X-ray. And he's like, no, it's probably more than 500 X-rays. And so it was, there's a misinterpretation of these meters, and the way that they download something and they think they have something that's accurate, that's actually measuring what they claim, and it doesn't have any formal testing or, regulatory oversight. And so, these are part of the reasons why we have these things in place, to ensure, we don't miscommunicate what's happening. But when you look at the intensity ratings of EMFs, right, most devices don't measure it accurately.
Okay.
So you are definitely getting overexposed, thinking that, this is probably okay.
I mean, that sort of brings me to the question of I don't know if we can quantify this, but how much can we actually take? And when we can't take more, that starts to, I believe it starts to result in disease or dysfunction or some kind of other deliberate biological issue that we have in our body. For some people, could it be a decrease in their cognition, an interruption in their sleep? Could it mean interruption in the way that their organs function? And so that leads to lab abnormalities and symptoms? Or where does
Yeah.
it begin or where does it stop? Or do we not know?
You know, I would think as a cancer doc, you're going to start seeing more and more of this stuff, and you're going to start seeing it in ways that don't meet the standard of care in terms of what, people have shown this is the way you diagnose it, this is how you evaluate it, because it's going to start looking, it's not going to fit in the box. And it's one of the things from the neuroscience side that we have been seeing, and this is disturbing, but it's the truth. And what happens is that you hold one of those phones up to your head, you're exposing your temporal lobes to a very high level of radiation, and you don't know it. And if you have it there for X amount of time, it's going to have X amount of response. And there's a couple of different studies that have been done at UC San Francisco. There was Dr. Eric Pepper did studies on EMF radiation and how it basically degraded the cells in the temporal lobes.
Oh,
And
boy.
so the thickness of the temporal lobes actually started to get thinner. And so
I mean, why wouldn't it? I mean, this is, in a way, it's these, I believe these higher frequencies create a degree of heat that then could burn out our brain cells?
Well, so the heat is it's not, yes, the heat is one of the factors that could do it.
Okay.
But more importantly, it's the speed of that EMF. Remember, we're talking about the frequency of it. And I think what's happening is that it's interacting with the structures in the molecule that's disruptive, like the mitochondria, for instance. I think it's also one of the things we did was we did some experiments where we did short exposures of a phone to the temporal lobe, and we noted a significant response in the brain that really reflected inflammation in the brain, right? So, almost immediately within a short period of time. We're talking about 15 minutes. And then we did other experiments where we exposed the brain, recorded EEG, noted the inflammation, and then put the Aries Tech mitigation device onto the phone, and then did another exposure immediately, and then we're able to show that the actual inflammation, the response in the brain went down.
Yeah, and those were wonderful. In fact, we're going to put the link to those videos from the Aries Tech website in the bio and the transcript of this podcast. That being said, let's talk about that, because that's the practical application for people's everyday lives, which means that you demonstrated that a mobile device that generally people carry around in their pocket could, after about 15 minutes, cause significant neuroinflammation.
Uh,
Could you tell us a little bit about the implications of neuroinflammation, because it's now sort of a big word in the biohacking world and in the it's becoming more in the medical world. And then you used an Aries Tech device and you showed resolution of that, and that was via QEEG mapping, or was it some other mechanism?
It was QEEG mapping.
Okay,
EEG mapping, and then we quantified the data.
got it.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
So what exactly is neuroinflammation? I mean, it's inflammation in your nervous system, but for me as a doctor, when it's happening in the brain, the brain is sort of controlling the rest of the nervous system. What implications does that have for normal brainwave activity that we would assume our brains are giving the rest of our body during the day? For instance, what if somebody sleeps very close to their phone?
Yeah. So one of the things we discovered years ago was, and when I started to first develop um, low intensity, low frequency EMF devices to stimulate the brain, we recognized that if you did a very, again, low frequency, low intensity stimulation, it wouldn't force the brain to do anything. It wouldn't force it to fire. It wouldn't cause a depolarization of neurons, but it would stimulate cells in such a way that they would call for resources. And so at that low intensity, you would get capillary dilation and a nice increase of blood flow into a region. Now, this is helpful for reducing, removing dead cells, fall into the bloodstream, become free radicals, and it opens up the area so that the brain can engage in neurogenesis and start to rebuild itself, essentially.
Okay.
And so this was, something we were able to show And we got real excited about that. But then what we found was that if you did something at the high intensity side, that it would overstimulate that area. And now you have massive amount of blood flow, and it's causing damage to that area in such a way that now those cells can't communicate properly. They can't engage in the network functions that they're supposed to engage in, and that's going to result in, depending on where you have it, in different kinds of cognitive problems.
And other functional issues, because you're essentially developing a central neuropathy, so to speak, is what it sounds like. I have a big question too. Another key or kind of buzzword out there is neuroplasticity. Listening to you and your interpretation of this, it's sounding like being bombarded with these types of EMFs, these harmful ones, and not mitigating them is probably the opposite of neuroplasticity.
Well, it would probably impact the process of you have your limbic system, and then you have your cortex, right?
Okay.
And the glue that puts the two together is the glia. The glia are rich in calcium and sodium, and calcium and sodium ions, right? And when you stimulate those, they start to surge. And when they surge, that's when the brain engages in an accelerated form of connectivity to repair itself at low levels, right? But at low frequency and low intensity, they're both very important. Low frequency, low intensity, that's when it's actually useful, it's good for you. It's like getting a warm massage where your brain can do what it's going to do without overpowering it or trying to force it to do something that it's not supposed to be doing. But at the high intensities, now you're bombarding the system, it surges, you get massive amount of blood flow, then it starts going faster. What we've observed is that the brain waves that get generated are significantly faster than if you had hit it with a low intensity field.
Okay.
And so now you start to see what's called high beta and more gamma activity.
Okay.
And this is what we typically see when the brain starts to get inflamed.
And then does that create anxiety in some people?
Exactly.
Okay. Well, and
Spot
so
on.
there is a relative epidemic of anxiety, and especially in younger people. And it sounds like utilization of the Aries Tech EMF diffractor devices could actually pull people out of that by producing and allowing us to engage in the sort of brain massage by regulating the brain waves and bringing people down from the faster frequencies. So I think that's incredibly important looking at our younger people today, especially because they have higher use of devices and they engage these devices at a younger age than, say, people in our generation did. We just simply didn't have them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're stuck in that. There's a whole anxiety generation, and
you
now
see
we have,
them and you work with them, I assume.
yeah. There's the hardware side of it that is, where neurologically the brain is being impacted significantly, and then there's the software side where there's the psychology and the belief systems and all the stuff that goes along with your only interaction is something where it's digital. That's a significant issue. And it's actually impacted the current generation that's in college. Failure to thrive, difficulty with being able to get things done, social issues, yada yada yada. It goes, the list goes on.
Well, I do want to talk about some of the practical implications and some of the research that's been done on these devices. I want to talk about the red blood cell studies and their deformability and the osmotic gradients, very important. I want to get into that. I want to talk about heart rate variability, which we should hit on. But first, I think before we delve into that, Mr. Bruni, I was curious about how the Aries Tech devices work. On your website and open to the public to view are a lot of research studies and a lot of papers. As a doctor, not a mathematician, it's so beautifully interesting to me to see the intensity of the intellectual context that's gone into the development of these and the proof of their effects. And I read a little bit about fractals. And it's my understanding that the EMF diffraction that these Aries Tech products provide is through the use of fractalization. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Maybe bring in how that relates to nature in terms of fractals in nature and why fractals could be beneficial to us to help combat these other high-frequency EMF stressors?
Fractals are a self-similar repeating pattern that as they continue to repeat, they actually don't take up more space. They divide within the same space. So it's not increasing area necessarily. And the reason why I think that's really important to understand is because a lot of times when you you understand the physics behind EMF, and whether that's AM radio waves or the Hertz waves we've been talking about with the Earth, or you're talking about these digital ones, there's geometry with that. And you understand that millimeter waves are what they are, they're millimeters. But then you talk about like AM radio waves, they're really large. And so the idea of fractals is really critical to understand how our product works, because it's this idea of scale and the range of frequencies that are able to be produced is possible through the use of fractals. And so this frequency range is greatly expanded when you're talking about how energy interacts with fractals and the geometry that's designed in our resonator chip. Because that's one question that we get a lot of, because the obvious thing is when you understand the physics, an AM wave, let's say a radio wave is large. So then you have this really tiny nanotechnology, which is our product. How does that actually now interact to create interference and diffraction with this larger wave? And so the idea being that the energy within our product and our technology is able to then broadcast what we refer to as a biotropic field. So the energy that it's able to interact with just around us, it creates a new field, and that new field then redistributes the energy that's being created through our electronic devices. In that redistribution, we have something called diffraction, and diffraction creates interference. And interference is the multiplying of waves that are in phase to create a amplified outcome, or a destructive interference, which is waves colliding or essentially out of phase that kind of kill each other, to describe it. And so that's essentially how our product works. And so it's tuned to the specific geometries that we are really after. And I would say the decades of research around our technology went from actually using physical structures to diffract to then using a highly conductive material, which is known as silicon, to actually be more sensitive, far smaller, more intricate in our ability to create a broader range of frequencies in this biotropic field. So over the years, the decades of work that's gone into this, it's gone from very large structures that actually truly, like, if you understand the slit test for water in like waves, when you push water through one slit, two slits, three slits, you see these different interactions occur. And it's a great way to visualize what's happening with electromagnetic waves, because you can see water. And so our larger structures would essentially create that type of interference using larger structures. Over time, it got smaller, and we were able to use the highly conductive, tunable material known as silicon, which is what microprocessors, and it's like gold on this planet right now, because everybody needs them for all of our technology. And that's what we use to create the specific outcome.
So, well, thank you. That's amazing. And so this thing around my neck, this is an Aries tech device, and I just wanted to show, because from a practical perspective, this is showing what is the gold material that's in there. And this is actually a fractal that I'm wearing, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the gold, what you're wearing is essentially a circuit board.
Okay.
And that gold,
Fancy.
what you see around there is a specific geometric pattern that is also fractal. Like, these are fractals that are designed, and that allows it works as an antenna to basically harness the energy that's in the environment, controls it and manages it, and then essentially funnels it to that resonator chip, which is also doing the same thing. And it allows us to our larger versions of that, which I actually have one right here. The larger version of that.
That's the Zone Max.
Yeah, the Zone Max, that one allows it to kind of really work in a space because it's just far more sensitive because it's a larger surface area. And so what that's doing is it's conducting, it's interacting with the energy. And then it, like as it creates that biotropic field. That biotropic field is stable and coherent. And so it interacts with the body in a way that creates a stable effect within the body. So it stabilizes it. And in the work that we've done with Dr. Dogris and others that you see on our website, you can see that through these physiological measurements like EEG and EKG and whatnot.
So this will work even though my clothes are blocking it?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
The same way that the EMF from your device will work through, walls. Yes, it diminishes, but definitely through your clothing.
But okay, so and then this one that I have on my phone, this is the
Yeah.
LifeTune Go. So this
That's
is
the
important.
LifeTune 1. Yeah.
I'm sorry. This is okay. The Go is what I'm wearing, obviously.
Yeah.
And then right, and you had the Zone Max. We
Yep.
have these, and so this is something like you showed. This is something that I keep in my bedroom, which I
Yes.
think is important where I sleep. So, one last question about this: it's important to have this actually on the device itself, not like in my pocket. Correct?
Yeah. For the smaller, basically the difference in all of our different versions of this technology is really the size, and the size that allows it to be further away from the source of radiation.
Okay.
So that smaller one really does have to be right on the phone or the baby monitor or your router or whatever it is to really be effective, because it's not large enough to interact in a significant way with the kind of the ambient electro smog that's around you. So you really do need to have that right on the specific source. The larger ones I showed you are more sensitive and it can be further away.
And then, just for clarity, because there's EMF, I don't know what EMF reduction devices that are being touted on YouTube or Instagram or out in the market. There's some materials out there that are different. So these devices that you produce do not absorb EMF. And that's an important concept, I think. Is that correct?
They don't absorb it in a way that's going to be effective in protection, but just in the general nature of the materials used and the way that they work, there is a level of absorption, just to be factually correct, but that absorption is not what makes it work to do what it's not what the effect is that we're after as humans. It's just how the product works, because the nature of the materials does have some level of absorption. But to answer your question, there are a lot of products out there. Mm-hmm. I don't understand half of them, and
that's a problem.
I would say we have spent, as I mentioned, decades refining, tuning, understanding the relationship to our bodies, to the earth, to this electronic radiation that's emitted, to really understand what this is. And that shows up in all of our research. There are dozens of research papers on our website. There are dozens that we haven't even put on the website because there's some redundancy there and whatnot, or they're just, we haven't, they're either waiting to be peer reviewed, or we have a lot of research on this topic. I don't think there's been anybody that has, for really a lot of the wellness products that are not medical, has put their product through as much rigor as ours has. We've put it through, but then had been forced to put it through because we are a public company. Yeah. And so in that process of becoming a public company, you have, regulatory bodies, you have banks, and you have people involved that want to make sure that this product that they're getting behind and introducing to the public markets is actually what it says it is. And so we had to go through multiple years of testing and third-party testing that was unrelated to us. So that the banks and the regulatory bodies in Europe, Canada, U.S. all kind of did their own research on this, and it was a lengthy process. Again, I would bring that up because there's so many products out there, whether that's your green drink, your multivitamin, your whatever it is. They just don't have that level of research to support it. They're typically using existing research that says, hey, there's this problem, or this particular ingredient solves that problem, and trust us, ours is the best. Right. And that's what kind of led us to Dr. Dogris, was like, we've been able to replicate these results and the effect in laboratories. Can you help us do this now to the public and help me understand it a little bit more? And that's really kind of how we met, was was through that means of like, we've been able to do this in laboratories. From my research, you seem to be an expert in the field, not only because practice the work, but you also develop the technologies, which I found that relationship of he's in the field testing every day, but then also like developing the technology is just so unique. And to develop the technology, you have to have such a strong understanding of electromagnetic radiation and electromagnetic fields to do what he does. So that's what led me to him. So I'll stop there because I could keep talking about all that, the research and the science and things like that, because I get really passionate about it.
It's fascinating. And the thing that you said is that there's some other products out there that may be core competitors, but you don't understand them. And I mean, I think that's a problem, because if you can understand them, then there's probably no basis for them, is what it sounds like.
Yeah. I just know how much work that we'd go through to demonstrate that the product works. And I also know that, like, it wasn't difficult for me to find my way to Dr. Dogris or the other people that we've worked with. Mm-hmm. So why wouldn't others do the same thing? If they truly had an effective product, it wasn't a difficult thing. As a matter of fact, I think people in the fields that you guys work in would be welcoming of solutions that were extremely effective. And so if someone called you and said, hey, I have something really effective, could you help me understand that? You would probably, let's take a look at that, because I have a need. There's a problem that needs to be solved, and I want to solve it.
Well, hence why we're on this call, and I think let's jump to some clinical stuff. I know that there was some early benchtop work being done looking at like the deformability and really the flexibility of red blood cells. Dr. Dogris, maybe we could chat about that very briefly. Then there was some work done on heart rate variability, and I know sort of in a more clinical sense, there's been some work done with UFC athletes and reaction times. And I'd love to talk about some of the practical applications for people out there. In terms of red blood cells, harmful EMFs can reduce their ability to carry oxygen. They can become, can you talk a little bit about the harmful EMFs and what they do to red blood cells? Because we rely on red blood cells.
I'd love to hear what you're moving to, because I bet it's cancer related then, right?
Yeah, I think there's going to be an interaction with cancer and the mitochondria, and I mean, I think sort of just the presence of health, which we need oxygen, right? Oxygen is how our mitochondria utilize or make energy, right? Without the oxidative phosphorylation, we can't produce energy efficiently. And some of the work that's been done historically and is ongoing in the world of cancer is that the way that cancer cells tend to produce energy is without oxygen, and they're very inefficient at doing that. The byproduct is lactic acid, becomes this acidic environment. But mitochondria prefer to use what's called oxphos, or just those pathways. Beyond that, how do they get the oxygen? Well, red blood cells are responsible for oxygen is breathed in through our lungs, and it traverses, I think, 7 membranes before it gets into the red blood cell. And if you have EMFs that negatively impact the red blood cell, and those red cells lose their ability to deform and their flexibility as they travel through the blood is a conduit, which is sort of like a superhighway, and only specialized cells in that fast-paced rheological movement of the blood, those cells have to be designed to be in the blood, right? And red blood cells are. And they may be cruising along, and they may hit a fork in the road or a juncture. They need to be able to sort of fold in on themselves or squash down so they can squeeze into the little nooks and crannies, and so they don't blow apart on that high-speed highway. If negative EMFs are impacting the red blood cell's ability to do that, we then can develop chronic disease, and we could develop cancer based on what I was just talking about. And so that's where I was going.
So to walk it forward another step, then those cells make it to the brain, right?
Yeah,
and
they're
supposed to give fuel to that brain. They're supposed to give resources to that brain so that it can function at its highest level. And what happens is that if you introduce a square wave to the brain, it's disruptive.
Yeah.
And so, the brain is a beautiful instrument, right? It has to work it's synchronized, it has to work in phase. And if you're holding something up to a temporal lobe and bombing the temporal lobe with a square wave, the temporal lobe is going to go out of phase with the frontal lobe. And now you have a desynchronous pathway that is oxygen starved. And when that happens, then you're going to have memory problems, 100%.
That sounds terrifying to have that happen.
It is. It's a very big reality that we need to look at. And from all fields, medicine, psychology, neurology, this is something that I feel very strongly about. That's why I do this. Because this is something that, in my opinion, we are close to epidemic status. And it is out there in a way where people really don't see the deleterious effects yet. They will. It's only a matter of time. You know, the outliers in the population, the very old and the very young, are the ones that are showing the most signs of issues right now. The other percentiles in the middle there are strong enough to be able to carry this forward. But give it another generation, and the genetic impact of that, and then the weakening of the human body in such a way where you can't tolerate it because of prolonged exposure, we have something that we have to think about in a very thoughtful way. And we need to do it scientifically.
I agree. And these products and what's behind these products is actually so impressively scientific in the work that you've done. What about athletic performance and reaction times? And I want to talk about reaction times, not just in terms of UFC athletes, but athletes in general. And then how about just people driving their cars or reacting to anything in life? What have you seen with that?
Yeah, think about it. When, just like I said before, when you're synchronized, when you're flowing,
Yeah.
when you're in phase, you're moving, you're popping on all cylinders.
Yeah.
Everything is easily accessed by you, right?
Yeah.
But when you're out of phase, how are you going to respond to an incoming punch, or when you have to swing a club or throw a ball, and all the hand-eye coordination, the detection responses, all the things that we have to do, you're not going to be able to do it as well. And so it was a no-brainer, no pun intended, but it was a no-brainer to see people respond quicker, significantly faster when the EMF was mitigated.
I mean, that's fascinating. Mr. Bruni, what UFC athletes are you currently working with or are brand ambassadors?
Yeah, so Michael Chandler I mentioned him right off the top of my head because he has a fight coming up in April.
UFC 313?
314 in Miami.
Okay.
Yeah, and so he's fighting there, and honestly, just an awesome human being, great gentleman, and great ambassador for us. And we work with Macy Barber. Macy was probably one of the earlier ones, and she was really interesting because she had kind of her own transformational experience with our product, and then also bought it for her family before she ever even contacted us. And she just said, I don't really know what's going on, but all I know is I'm not getting the headaches, my sleep, my recovery, all these things, these markers were improving for her. And people always ask us, okay, why athletes? Why athletes? And the reality is, it's the athletes came to us because I always, in my conversations, I always kind of pinpoint it to the fact that they're just highly tuned. So they control so much, especially as these fighters are, preparing for a fight. Everything in their environment is completely controlled and architected around, optimizing for this moment, diet, sleep, when they work out, how they work out, everything they do, because they're most likely cutting weight in some instances. So their energy management's really critical. Recovery is so critical for them. There's so many elements that are just so important to showing up and performing for 25 minutes at the peak performance, right? There's so many things that have to go right. Yeah. So they're just so sensitive. So like if the diet's off, sleep's off, they know it. And that's where EMF, I think, has found its way to this elite level of performance, whether that's our, NBA or hockey or whatever, is because they're just sensitive. And so they understand the changes in their environment that maybe set them back or move them forward, for that matter. Like I picked on, your green drink or your multivitamin. Most of them know. Yeah, most of them know like if it's working or it's not working because they're sensitive to it. The same thing is true on the other side. A lot of the other kind of core market for us is people that are dealing with some sort of, physical, mental, emotional, some sort of difficulty. And I always just look at it as like everybody's trying to raise their baseline, but their baselines are all at a different spot. So the professional athletes trying to raise their baseline, they're just at a different spot than the person that's not feeling so well. But everybody's just trying to raise their baseline. And EMF is something that is a problem for everybody, no matter where they are on that baseline spectrum, if you will.
I mean, I would think that this would be important, like reaction times for elite sprinters, getting, right at the gun. Thinking about gymnasts who have to be perfection, and I can't imagine the intricacies of what's going on with the brain. And then surgeons. I mean, sometimes there's split decisions, just quick decisions that you have to be, like Dr. Dogris said, firing on all cylinders and everything going on, for life-saving issues. And then there's just the everyday person who might be texting and driving or talking on the phone and driving, and all of a sudden something might run out in the street, and that could be a person. And reaction times need to be, for many reasons, need to be right there. So I could see even, would people have these in their like electronic vehicles? Would they have like a zone or a zone max in there?
I actually think the bigger concerns are the non-electric vehicles. I think the electric vehicles actually do a pretty good job with shielding in them because they're thinking about this already. Okay. And they know that they're already creating, an electromagnetic field that's different. But every new vehicle you buy has some level of connectivity and transmitting of information and data, not thinking about shielding near the same way that electrical vehicles are. I would be concerned about all, but I do think that what you see in electric vehicles is when they're charging is probably when they're most leaking of EMF. But every vehicle, we have the ability to obviously have hundreds of thousands of customers all over the globe. And so we're getting information and signals from all over the place from all sorts of people. And we hear cars a lot. We hear about the Apple Watch. We hear about AirPods. Those are the ones I would say are the gateway products that people find their way to us for, whether they actually have some sort of physical reaction to them, a negative reaction, or an intuition of like, something's off or something's not right. We typically find that moms would be like, moms are highly sensitive, intuitive, and are always taking action to say, I don't like this. So moms is another one. There's like, every mom has that intuition to say, this wireless technology that I have all around my newborn baby, maybe not good, right? Yeah. And, or while I'm pregnant or whatever. So there's these different categories that we kind of see percolating that, like where people find themselves to Aries.
I love it.
So you mentioned the red blood cells. Yeah. And so the red blood cells is actually one though that we do have some research on our website around, because we could reproduce that. It's actually pretty easy to produce the results in a lab of clumping of red blood cells. So we actually have some of that research that we've done on our website, and then also showing how Aries actually improves the integrity of the cell membrane, improves, reduces all the clumping, all the things that you just talked about. That is one area that we actually do have research on related to the negative effects of EMF. Now, we're not talking about what does that cause, but we can reproduce that. Same with like water, in like the clumping of water molecules and whatnot. You can see the same thing happen within water. So there's all different things that you can that are actually fairly easy to reproduce. The same way that we can reproduce the inflammatory effects of the cell phone next to the head, using the EEG and whatnot. So that is one area that we actually do have a fair amount of research on the website.
Which gets me really interested from a medical perspective, because there may be a way to reproduce that actually in vivo in a human being, or starting out with a rat, where you can tag red blood cells and then you can expose them to certain frequencies and see if they do clump. And then you can expose them to Aries Tech products and see if they unclump, and you can watch them travel through the body. And that would be fantastic to look at. Yeah. I think.
Yeah. Pretty cool.
Perfect. Gentlemen, this has been fascinating. This is technology that is here in really just every human in living in the metropolitan areas, or even, some rural, just need to understand the impact that EMFs are having. This is like essential for humanity, and I love the work that you've done. I love the intensity. I love that you've used human subjects to be able to show that this works for humans, and I just can't really thank you enough for spending time with the Rubin On Point podcast.
Well, thanks for having us.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us on Rubin On Point, a podcast about cancer, resilience, and most of all, about being human. I hope today's conversation inspired you to see new possibilities for growth, healing, and strength in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who could use a little extra resilience in their day. Remember, No matter what challenges you're facing, resilience isn't just about bouncing back. It's about building a life of purpose, connection, and vitality. Until next time, stay strong, stay healthy, and take care of yourself and those around you.